Welcome. Today, I have invited two psychotherapists from the Washington state and one friend from a large tech company in San Francisco Bay Area. So four of us will talk about this phenomenon called xenophobia that a lot of Asians are facing right now under coronavirus in America. We will talk about what it is and how to cope with it. Welcome everyone, and we all have our tea ready, right? Yeah. Okay. So before we start, I want maybe we can all introduce ourselves to the audience, whoever watched this video or listen to the audio, so they can know who you are. Arjun, you want to start first?
Sure, I can start. Hi, everyone. My name is Erjing. I am currently a mental health therapist based in Seattle. My backgrounds are my graduate research background was in Asian Americans mental health and also like China, U.S. Cultural mental health and in cultural differences in child development. So, and right now, one of my specialty in treating my clients are also Asian Americans populations. So, I'm happy. Thanks for inviting me to have a discussion about racism that we face in times of COVID-19.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Who wants to go next? Melissa?
Sure, yeah, I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa. I'm currently a program manager at a tech firm in Bay Area. So a little bit about my background. I came to the U.S. as a graduate student right after graduating from college in Wuhan University, actually. I just want to mention that because I have a deep root in Wuhan. And then after graduating, I started working here. Now I have a family. I also have a 1-year baby. So as a mom, I'm also very concerned about how this could affect my family, how to protect my family and baby. And I really think this is an interesting topic to me as a first-generation American, as well as a mom, even just observing some of the trend in China about how Chinese people in some of the topics that they have been discussing are kind of like the foreigner, the Chinese. So I really want to kind of discuss a lot of the things that we are experiencing as Asians in overseas.
Hey, thank you for joining us.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Ja. I am a youth mental health therapist and also a group facilitator for a teen leadership program here at a local agency in Seattle that serves the API population. I identify myself as a second-generation Filipino American, and I'm also a parent too of a toddler, a 1.5-year-old. So I bring that specific background into just like the dialogue that we're having today. And thank you for having me.
Awesome. We have a great mix of groups to really discuss this recent phenomenon, this xenophobia situation we are all facing under COVID-19. So I don't know whether any of you read the news about Andrew Yang. He said something, he wrote something online, got a lot of mixed feedback from especially the Asian community. What he said, let me quote here. We will also put it on the screen later. So for the first time in years, I felt it. I felt self-conscious, even a bit ashamed of being Asian. Yeah, so I'm wondering, we're all Asians here, different generations. So what do you all think about this expression, this way of him describing his own experience?
So I honestly feel a little bit surprised and shocked about he said that he was even ashamed of being Asian, because I would personally think it's nothing about Asian Americans specifically or about Asians specifically. The virus is really non-gender or non-racial race specific. It could have started in the U.S. It could have started anywhere else in the world, and just think about like Zika, Ebola, all these like HIV, all these other diseases that started in different parts of the world. I think it's a problem we all have to tackle, and we shouldn't be thinking about finger pointing at specific race for you started the problem. Why do we have to suffer? So I think that attitude to me is very wrong. That's circulating in the society, and that's even affecting some of the Asian.
I was really confused when I first heard this. I wonder, let me see if I understand the context a little bit. So like, let me know if I'm wrong, or Yishan, maybe you can provide a little bit more context from what I understand. How he was making this comment was he was relating it to what happened back in World War II with Japanese American being, what's the word? That like the government decided to put all the Japanese Americans in a
internment camp.
Yeah, in a internment camp, and he was comparing to that a little bit to say like the Japanese Americans back then felt shameful, and that's why they said that like the way to deal with this was to get themselves in war and show American and prove to Americans that they're actually white, they're actually Americans. And he was saying that as a more of a comparison of like the reason why I feel shameful, it's because then I can do something about it. Then I can prove American, which not to say I agree with that. I was just trying to understand the context a little bit because I was really confused by the comment itself. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Can anyone jump in?
Yeah, my understanding, I was also very confused because feels like he's trying to really focus on the problem solving and encourage people how we can move forward, how we can help Asians to fit in the society and feel more like either empowering ourselves or just to be able to live better. So we need to really find a way to fit in to fit in the mainstream. So but the way he's describing it and whatever he's connecting it to, I think still trigger a lot of feelings instead of Asians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really difficult just because his solution, from what I remember, was like, we need to be dressing up in red, white, and blue, and we need to be honking our cars, showing that like we're American. And I think that's kind of scary because it's like for a lot of Asians that already kind of struggle in like living in a bicultural environment, it's like, how Asian are you? Do you erase that? How American are you? I think from my own personal experience with my parents coming here to the US in the 70s, I've seen them walk that fine line of how Filipino can I be and how American should I be when I'm in like certain situations. So when I think of like his response and how we should act and what we should do, it stirs like a lot of personal emotions for me because of just the experience that my family has felt. And I think of I don't know where he is and also like where he is when it comes to his own understanding of like his culture and like how that impacts him. But I also kind of don't want to discredit him, but also acknowledge like what other people feel that might not look like what he's feeling at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like we are all raised differently. And also I think for Melissa, me and Arjun, we are like, we immigrate to America for school and then stay here, right? And the way we grew up, and there's a lot of culture difference, how we can do certain things, like to be bold, to be very extrovert, to show a lot of things. I feel like it's very different for a lot of Asians, especially when we look at Asians, we have a lot of values, are slightly different. A lot of Asians could be a little bit how to say, traditional. And I think we deal with the same thing very differently. And is that reasonable to encourage all Asians or most Asians try to change yourself to a certain way in order to look Americanized or to be more accepted? And also, is that the only way we could be accepted is to do the same thing with them? Or could we still keep who we are, our core, our values, and do things differently, but still be recognized that I'm Asian, I have my own ways of thinking and doing things, but I'm still part of this society?
And I think as an Asian myself, it's very disappointing to hear someone like him to make such comment because of how, I think when he first came out to complain, there's a lot of hope and good voices coming from the Asian community to say, oh, we finally have a Asian person, right, to try to be in the political political world, but this comment sort of has this implication of like, wait, I'm out here not because I wanted to be myself, to be Asian, but I'm also encouraging you guys to try to blame me as much as possible to basically, what I'm hearing is be more white. It's like, I feel shame about who I am, and I have a lot of work to do to blame into the mainstream society, which is the white society, but not the really of who I am as an Asian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I think Andrew Young's comment was really triggered by this xenophobia we are experiencing right now, right? And so I think that's his way of thinking and reacting towards this personal experience. And then he just speak of his mind, and we all read it differently, we all think of differently. So I'm curious regarding the xenophobia, which is everywhere right now in America. Any of you have either personal experience of that? Have you encountered it yourself in the neighborhood, or have friends, colleagues have some negative experience about that? I think we all live in different areas. So I'm just curious what that look like right now in your own experience.
Yishan, I think you make the really good point. You're saying that his comments, it's actually less of a encouraging, but more of a comment that he make as a victim of Asian American and sort of his emotional response of being a victim of this. Right, and if people read it differently, it can be hurtful to think that this is how everyone should be, versus really take a pause to understand, why are you feeling shameful, right? What you can do about it. Yeah,
I definitely agree. I think to some extent, because there are a lot of news could be interpreting something differently. Maybe his sentence was not meant for this, and you can just take whatever he said and then portray it in a certain way. For me, personally, I don't even think this article is demonstrating something that's or a solution to the current situation, COVID-19, because blaming Asian people, or like these incidents happen, maybe there's a correlation with COVID-19, but being more American, is it helping us with this specific situation? Like, there's a long-standing issue with this culture, with this society, that maybe there are some Asians that they don't feel fit in, but it is an incident that kind of exaggerated the situation, but like fitting in more like an American is definitely not part of the solution. So definitely it's more of like emotional response, like as an Asian, that as a second generation Asian, he's living here, he's feeling this way, but he's not like suggesting this is how we can solve our problems. I don't think that that's what he meant either.
Yeah, and I think like when you're, I guess like from from what I heard, my impression too is that he also kind of jumped into survival mode too. And I think it's like, this is the best way that I can make sure that I'm safe by saying, or like by acting like a certain way. So I kind of also thought about like, okay, intergenerational trauma, what does that look like? How have like our ancestors survived? And then how does that kind of trickle down into the different generations? So I thought that like maybe that would be why he had responded the way that he did.
Right. Yeah,
Definitely.
that come up this question I always have, that do you think he's overreacting, or do you think other people are overreacting or too numb about it? It's like the common fight or flight or freeze mode, right? When you talk about the survival mode. So what is a healthy line there? What is a healthier way of coping? If his way of reflecting on that and commenting on that, if is that an overreaction based on his survival mode? And also, I know someone out there are very numb. They try to avoid everything. They don't want to think about it. They just want to focus on their own life. Try to shut down all the information, which I'm not sure that's helpful either. Yeah. So, what do you all think about it?
I feel like I don't, like I said, I feel like I don't have enough context because I didn't follow through very clear in detail about Andrew's comment. Part of me, I think part of me was still confused and wondering about him being a public figure and even a little bit of being a representative in the political campaign for Asian, and the implication of him saying those things. So like, even though understanding if this, especially if this is a survival response or emotional response, but I'm confused of why he would decided to make this comment, given
but I think my question is more like away from him, because I haven't followed his news that closely either. It just overall as Asians, right? What may be a overreaction for us, because this experience and this personal experience. I don't know whether anyone had that experience. And are we some of us overreacting? Some of us are too numb about that. So that's more like related to, I'm curious about this, what happens around us. I definitely heard colleagues in New York, right, encounter some of that, and they don't feel safe. They would carry pepper spray, for example, with them on the train, on the public transportation, as self-protection. So what in this situation, what have you heard of? What do you think?
This is a very interesting question, because if I reflect myself in my household, I have like two people in very extremely different camps. So my husband, he's white American, and my mom, obviously she's elderly Chinese, and then my baby. So four of us live in the same household. And every day my mom is extremely worried, and she reads everything the headline, and especially she reads the Chinese news because she doesn't know much English. So every day the Chinese headline are talking about, there are how many cases in the USA, especially in New York and California, and blah, 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 blah. And she is so extremely overwhelmed, and she's so worried. She never goes to grocery stores. She insists all of us wearing N95 masks. But on the other hand, my husband, he is like so reluctant about masks, because obviously a couple days earlier, CDC didn't recommend like wearing masks is mandatory, is helpful, and he thinks that even if you wear masks, as long as you don't wear them correctly, it's actually doing very little help. And he is staying 6 feet away, and he goes to grocery store all the time, not wearing masks, but he does stay 6 feet away. He's thinking the chance of getting coronavirus is even slower than the chance of getting hit by a car. It's much higher to hit by a car. So from the very early days, like from early January, we've been having this debate. And obviously, my husband has been shifting a little bit more over to the other camp given the current situations. But I often found myself in the middle and trying to struggle between them. And sometimes I have to calm my mom down, and sometimes I have to really bring my husband up to speed about, hey, it is really an issue. You have to protect yourself, because otherwise all four of us are in line of getting coronavirus. You're the healthy person, and we have the elderly, we have the weak, I'm the weak, and we have the young. So you really have to be mindful of that. So I think everybody has calmed down a bit, and now we make the rule of like, okay, let's go to grocery store at most 2 times a week, and let's make sure we wear masks and everything. So it is definitely a balance between these two thoughts. And even the elderly are more going get the disease easily, and we have retirement housing right next to us. So in a way, my mom is even more afraid of elderly people. That let's not get too close to them. They may have like coronavirus. So in a way, although we say we as Asians, we are now the victim of coronavirus, but unconsciously we're really thinking about elderly people. They're carrying coronavirus. Let's not get too close to them. So in a way, we're also kind of reversing our position somewhat, and it's kind of understandable. Like there are different camps. It's really we think differently. It has something to do with how we grew up, how our psychology works, how our crisis mode is. But I think we just have to cope with whatever situation we're in, and however we can, whatever we can do to deal with it.
Melissa, I do appreciate everything that you say, especially when it comes to your family, because it's funny that you brought all of this up, because also just like last week, I've been I've been also in the middle of different things regarding like my husband's family. So my husband is also white, and my kid is like half. But it was very interesting that like just last Sunday, we had a video call with his family, and his family had asked me, hey, how are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm doing fine. I'm still working full time. And even though I know it's not ideal because we're trying to practice social distancing, like as a person that's working full time and my husband working full time and having a toddler being around, it's very, very hard to work and take care of a young person when like a lot of the times like our work isn't really flexible enough to be to let us like have that time to like really make sure that like the baby is being taken care of. So I just told the family during this call that I know it's not ideal, but when my husband goes to his parents' house, he brings the kid and works from there. And then on other days, like my parents will come to my house and like take my kid so that they can make sure that like we're working. So he's like, my kid is at 2 separate households. So just like the other day, his brother had called, not knowing that my husband had put him on speakerphone, and I was on the other side of that call too, and said, hey, I was really concerned about what Ja had said on this video call, because I don't want our parents, getting sick because this child is going back and forth. And I was just thinking, it's a privilege to work from home, first off. Like to work remotely is a privilege, but also to, it's for a lot of people that are like the frontliners in their line of work or essential workers, it's very unrealistic to not have someone take care of their child during this time. So I think the reason why this whole conversation kind of stemmed was because they also knew that my mom worked in a hospital, and her job in the hospital is that she's a dietary nutritionist, but her interaction with patients aren't that much. And she had said that since the coronavirus has happened, a lot of the traffic in the hospital has slowed down because they're making more room for people that need it versus like the other surgeries or whatnot. So that was kind of like their concern about it. But I was thinking, well, on the flip side, like if we didn't have that, then what would the other option be? And one was like, well, you could have just one set of parents watch the kid, but given that they're also elderly, is it realistic for them to watch a kid like the whole, 5 days a week? So it's like you're walking this fine line constantly. And I also kind of find myself like, okay, what is an overreaction? What is something that's like realistic? And it's hard. It's hard to have that conversation, especially when it's family, because I constantly have to be like, okay, don't get so sucked up, but be really factual about like what you're trying to do to make sure that like your family and you are safe in like the realistic context of what's there in front of you. So I do appreciate like what you're saying, Melissa, with all of that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Doris and Melissa. When I hear the both of you, what I'm thinking, even it's the question, I think it's a really good question to ask. It's what it's overreacting, because I think that's something that we are trying to figure out. But I also think maybe when we ask this question, it's the context of like, what is this question trying to answer? If it's a question to judge how each of us are behaving and each of us are reacting, maybe that's not the right question, because I think, for example, with Melissa sharing what's happening with the mother, it makes me think about this post that my coworker was sharing about how some of our parents seems to have a stronger reaction and anxiety to what's going on because of the transgeneration traumas that they went through when they were younger, of going through poverties and going through periods when survival safety was a concern. So for them, this is more of a trigger to trauma of what they experienced in younger. And it makes sense that their baseline anxiety is going to be higher for us. And it's not really for us to judge, to be like, why are you feeling more anxious than we are? Because we're not, right? Because we're so different. I'm not saying that's what Melissa is doing. I'm just like, it reminds me of saying like these questions of like, be careful of understanding how everyone's reaction is different, and everyone's sense of everyone's levels of anxiety and how everyone's handling things because of the realistic of what's going on at home. It's also complex and different. In that sense, I don't know if there is such thing as overreacting, but maybe more of understanding where you are. But I also do think the question of overreacting might be helpful in context of asking ourselves or caring for our loved ones to say, if you are overly anxious, if you are stressing out too much or having a lot of mental health response to what's going on right now, that it's just not healthy for you. Maybe that's a good point. Good way to figure out, okay, is there coping skills? Is there ways we could help you so you're not so overwhelmed by what's going on? I think in those contexts, it's good to talk about that. But in the very end, I agree with you that it's hard to balance, and I don't think anyone has the answer to what's normal, what's overreact, because we're not in a normal time right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think clinically we always want to make sure whatever we are trying to do, right, it's not really getting in the way of our daily functioning. Yeah, I think, for example, I know some of my neighbors who are also Asians, because they're so worried about being have this kind of experience of xenophobia. They would not go to any grocery store. They would try to order everything online. They are very cautious to extreme levels that the whole household suffers, because they limit even the little babies to go out to play for all this, not only the coronavirus itself, but worry about other people's reaction to them. Especially when it's a mixed community, there are Caucasians, there are other ethnicities walk by outside their place, they are more scared. I think that's definitely, I can see how the daily function is impaired. But also I know people just like don't do any protection, don't care, and go their own way, which could also make the whole household feel insecure.
Yeah, I just want to add on a little bit because I think all of what you're from psychologist view, it totally makes sense. Another thing that my mommy worries about is in addition to the current situations, she's also worrying about our jobs on the line, and she's thinking about 6 months from now, both of us will be losing our job. My dad will be losing our job, and everybody will suffer because of this. And there's no income in the family anymore. So she is thinking the real suffering, the real test is upcoming after it's ending. Then everybody is going to lose their job with no income, and we have to really think about how to cope with that right now. So just want to say, like, people who are worrying about it will worry about a lot of things, and it could extend to all areas of life and the rest of their life maybe. So how to cope with that, how to help them is something that we can focus on as well.
And I could see, I could see similar. I can see similar anxieties with the topics that we're talking today about, like the racism, right? If you're overly anxious about what would this mean as me, as an Asian being American, shall I go back to where I'm from? Should I be looking, for my visa? I have heard some of these conversations and thinking as well, which goes way into the futures of things that we cannot control right now.
Yeah, and especially in China right now, it's also kind of getting a reverse xenophobic. Like, it's not only saying, like we're having travel bans with all other nations, but also Chinese people who are living abroad now going back to China, they're also kind of saying, no, these people when they went abroad, they went for better life. Now they can't get a good life there. They have to come back to motherland, and yet they're not coping or complying with all the rules and laws that they have to comply here. And I'm pretty sure there are maybe a couple cases that have been, that had happened, that these people were not really observant of the Chinese law. But I think it has been bubbled up to a certain extent. Now, whatever you say about some good parts of the overseas government, or like you're optimistic about the situation, then you're gonna get a lot of like negative comments about like, you don't love the country, and then why do you come back, and you're like you're not good, and to the level that they're denying yourself. So I really kind of don't like that trend a little bit. I hope people are kind of a bit more understanding. So like, for example, this is also one of my mom's worries, like, now living in the US is already very hard. Going back to China is even harder. So where can I be? Where should I live? Another level of anxiety for people living overseas.
Mm-hmm. I think
very interesting. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say that another thing that I've noticed with all of this happening, and where I live in like I live close to the airport, so I'm in Seattle. The area that I live in is Burien, which the population here is mostly lower middle class folks. So there are a lot of apartments, there are a lot of minority folks, but the way that I see people interact with each other is such a night and day difference compared to someone that I would see like interacting with their community and like maybe like another richer or like a more well-off neighborhood in Seattle. And it's become more of like a class issue. I think that when it comes to dealing with how this virus is happening, a lot of people that don't understand that many of these like lower middle class folks, lower income folks live in multi-generational houses where they're in little apartments where to even self-quarantine is a privilege. I think people don't understand that, like when they don't live that, or like the idea of, you don't have to have your kid like going back or going into childcare, and them saying that because they don't have any kids or them not being like really connected with their family. I think like with the Asian culture, family is the heart to a lot of like our healing and like our community. And I think it's really hard to dismiss that factor to it. So when I think of like the overreaction and the avoidance of certain things, for someone it might look like it's like an overreaction, but like for some people it might not, because that might be kind of like part of the culture already.
Right, that's such a good point. Yeah, a lot of different Asians living situation, culture background, how we are dealing with it right now, and all these worries Melissa is talking about, different layers of worries. I definitely hear that mostly from parents' generation or my own clients who are very, very anxious. They would think about the very catastrophizing about all the worst of the worst scenario that may happen right now and after and down the line, what their life may look like. So sounds like xenophobia it's such a phenomenon that happen everywhere. In America, it's more because it's people think it starts in China, so all the Asians now are target of bring the virus here. And within China, I know originally other people, Chinese people from other province kind of have this bias against people from Wuhan, right? And then it's expanded to the whole province where Wuhan located. And I know several days ago when the policy changed within China that, okay, everyone in Wuhan now will be able to go back to their own hometown. It caused some panic, some fear, some discussions all over China. They are like, oh no, they are coming back. What should we do? We have to be prepared. I think this kind of like bias against each other is everywhere. So what are some reasons behind that? How we can understand this from whatever angle? I believe there are different social, history, and psychological reasons behind it. Any of you have any ideas you think, like based on your understanding, what was the root, the reason, or some of the factors behind xenophobia?
Yeah, I definitely think that xenophobia has existed for a long time, and it's as long as human beings has existed. It has some revolutionary roots to it. I think even back in the old days, in the Stone Age days, when there was like two tribes, there are certain advantages if you favoring your own tribe. You care for your own parents, you care for your own tribe people, then your tribe will survive longer, and your genes will be carried down to your next generations than the other tribes. So it's always about me and they. It's always between us and them, and that exists throughout Chinese, not Chinese, but like world history. Like there's always wars, there's always fights, there's always conflicts. The civilized society is actually very rare to find in different societies. It's all only it's very fragile, based on like abundant food. There are fewer people than the resources available. Everybody can live a comfortable life. At that point, then people become a little bit more civilized. So it's fragile in a way that one pandemic or one famine or one war can destroy all the civilization that people have built in the past. And I think the human world has been under so many tests. Just this one little pandemic has already unveiled a lot of the things. Even the most developed country like US has uncovered a lot of the things that this society has already, the issues that the society already exist. So like even back in China, even without pandemic, the less developed provinces were always being kind of discriminated against, and people in the more developed provinces always feel superior about themselves. In the U.S., like certain race, there's always white supremacists, and they're like the richer people who are feeling better. I mean, there are always people who are very helpful, who are very kind, who are helping with each other. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but in general, I think it's kind of everywhere, and it's part of the human nature to xenophobic a little bit, and it does have its revolutionary root. And I think through education and through mixing everybody together, we're improving and we're helping each other. But we're far from kind of being to that perfect state that everybody love each other and don't judge or discriminate each other. I think there's still a lot of work to be done.
Thanks for sharing. I definitely agree about this human nature in xenophobia, about how it exists in pretty much all societies where they're humans. At the same time, I feel like when we talking about what's going on in the U.S., it also has its own unique perspective and issues because of its political context and its history in the U.S. Because the U.S. is a country that's established in Constitution to be known as an immigrant country where everyone is supposed to be equal, and a so-called diverse country with all immigrants from immigrants, all immigrants welcome, the so-called melting pot that we heard, right? This the melting pot story. But at the same time, also the other side of the reality where on one hand, this is how the country theoretically it's from the upper, but in reality, how this country it's also a very white dominant society. And I think that just like the this discrepancy between these two messages and these very just like doesn't belong together things makes the issues or the topics, the racial topics and racism topics very unique and different in the US. So because of our conversation, I did a little bit of search around U.S. history of dealing with these disease, and not surprisingly, but also very interesting for me to find out that there's actually a history of U.S. Associating disease with certain country. It's a thing. Mm-hmm. So I can share a little bit. So I think that a lot of us know or hear about Spanish flu back in 1918s. And I don't know how many people know that Spanish flu back then was actually not originated in Spain.
Kentucky farm.
Kansas, first case Kansas, was recorded in Kansas. And what happened back then was that the flu actually was spreading throughout the U.S. and European countries, but all countries at the time was, for the longest time trying to cover it and said that it didn't happen, just like, how it happens today. Histories repeat each other. And at the time, actually, Spain was the first countries to stand out and to say that this was happening in the country, which is why then this got this misconception of this being a Spanish flu. And actually, after the Spanish flu name was named, at the time, the East Coast, right? Yes, the East Coast of the U.S. has a lot of Spanish immigrants, and they were also experiencing a lot of racism and discrimination at the time because of how the Spanish flu's name was. And then just like a little bit after, what we know about smallpox and cholera, those were also two disease that was originated in Europeans, but no one asked in the U.S. to be somewhere coming from China. And there is some scholars and experts through my research to say that they believe this was actually related to how 1882's Chinese Exclusion Act was taking in place because of this belief in the society at the time, whether through social media or through government, that the Chinese people, the Asian people were the people who bring in this disease. And what's really interesting, then later on, when plague, is that right? Is that what it's called? When plague came out, again, it's actually a disease that started very originally in Egypt, in like way back 500 and the 750s. But when there's a third wave in the U.S., first case was found in Chinatown in San Francisco. And for 2 years, California government in Chinatown in San Francisco trying to deny that this happened. But then when they can't cover it anymore, they decided at the time to actually only quarantine Asian Americans in Chinatown, but refused to quarantine also white population who were also living in that area that was also infected, because some of them had this belief, even the government had this belief of this being a disease that only affected Asian. Like there was at the time this saying of like, this is Oriental Asian disease that's particular to rice eater, when we actually know that this is a disease that's transferred. It's a bacterial that transmitted through fleas, right? From fleas to fleas, that affects everyone in the world. But there's always this idea somehow transmitted or throughout by social media or government about this being and others and Asians in this example. So it's just like really interesting to looking back at these for me, and also knowing like when 1957, I don't know if you guys know, H2N2 was named as the Asian flu, right? But like the Spanish flu, the Asian flu, but then when 2009 H1N1 in American came out, of course, CDC did not name the American flu. It was named the swine flu. And even then, at the time, on social media, there was a lot of media about the swine flu being originated from Mexico, but not in the US. So just like over and over, it's really interesting to see how there is a history and reputation of whenever these things happen, there's some political reason of saying and almost blaming immigrants and minorities on these things that happen to almost like, so it feels like so people's anxiety can be going towards somewhere else, but not the government, not the mainstream, but the others. So I think that was really interesting for me to learn about. I don't know what you guys feel.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, Melissa, and urging about like human nature and also like the political aspect of this, because when Yishan was asking the question, I thought like right away, oh, this is an easy question to answer, because I think it has to do with colonization. And I think that's kind of like where I stem from, because for example, like in our culture and from our country, and I'm not too sure about like just the history of China and who's gone in there and whatnot. I know like from the Philippines, we were under Spanish rule for 300 years, and then we were occupied by the Japanese at one point and also the Americans at one point. So there have been a lot of different people just coming in, trying to claim our territory. And it's been a lot of just like people going in and out. So I was thinking just like with the whole xenophobia and why it happens, I think about the countries that have been impacted the most. And I think those are countries that have primarily dealt with the colonization of people just being there. But urging, I also think that what you mentioned too about how like the Spanish flu was discovered, even though it was like based out of somewhere in, was it Kentucky or Kansas? I can't remember. But even if it was based out from like here in the US and someone first claiming that they had the first, I guess, like case maybe reported in Spain, I was thinking about the coronavirus, because not too long ago, And my morning routine is that I listen to Up First in the morning, which is from NPR. And I listen to that because it's short. I don't like any long news. I don't like anything that's over like 30 minutes. I just want news this quick, and I want to hear everything that's going around the world. So that's my form of self-care to make sure I don't go nuts. So in the morning, I listened to Up First, and they had interviewed a doctor from Milan who was saying that in November, there were just a bunch of elderly folks that were getting pneumonia-like symptoms, and like the fever would spike up, but they weren't really quite sure what it was. And then in December is when you actually hear that in China, that's when those cases like start happening. So it's made me kind of think of, whose story are you putting in the front line? And is it like really media that's like making things worse for people? Personally, I would want to see a little bit more research done. And I know that people are like, well, it really like originated from China, but I just want to wait like a couple of years to really see kind of like where all of this has originated from, because I think it would be really interesting to just be very factual and get all those facts and find like a timeline of that. Because yeah, you're right. It's like sometimes it's the people that like sound off the horn that get blamed first. And I think that might, for me personally, I kind of have like a theory that might be kind of like the case with this coronavirus.
Yeah, I think politically it's definitely easier to blame somebody else. That, from politician point of view, it's like, that's not our problem, that's other people's fault, and we're suffering from it because of other people's fault. It's easy to have those nationalists standing out and say, yes, we're great, these people are not great, and all of our problems are because of those people. And I think even in China, they were debating that it was not originated from China, and there was like some conspiracy theory saying that it was the US who secretly started it. They were cultivating these virus in their lab, and they were trying to attack China, blah blah blah. So there were all kinds of conspiracy theories, and I'm not surprised if like later down the line we found that there are actually other places that concurrently these things happened. And I think, on the other hand, even if this disease is indeed happening from like China or anywhere else, it's not like we should be blaming the country who originated that. That's like not the cause. That's not like the root cause of it. And I think people like to feel like there's somebody that we can blame, and it's their causing the issue, and we just bear the consequence, so we're innocent. But actually, there's nowhere in the world where a problem is not your problem, that you don't need to fix it. Just like global warming, America and China, I'm not saying, anywhere else, not any other countries, but a lot of countries are causing it, but who are suffering from it? They're the poorest people in Africa who are suffering from it. They're suffering from food shortage. They're suffering from, I forgot what's the name of that disease, but like there were lots of bugs that eating up their crop. They don't have enough to even live by, and the sea level is rising. They don't have enough land. So the poor people usually suffer that most. And it's really a global issue. Just like coronavirus, America is suffering a lot, Europe is suffering a lot, but who are suffering the most? People who are in Africa, they don't even have the money to buy the masks and everything, because Europe and USA are outbidding all of that. And you think these people are suffering, and nobody's covering those people, because now we're just reporting China, US, Europe, China, US, Europe, right? But I want to say, like, no matter where this thing originated, as long as it's in the world, as long as it's in the universe, everybody has to bear the consequence, and we have to help each other. And it's not like a blaming game. We just have to find out like where this thing originated, and those people have to bear the most cost. I just think it's really not the right attitude to look at these things. But on the other hand, I also understand, like, as a general public, there are going to be these kinds of opinions always, because that's kind of what the politicians want. That's how the media wants to cover it. But for people who are working, like I see, there's always a smaller group of people who are educated, who I think we should be seeing it differently, like rather than blaming and finding out the group of people who originated, but we have to find them out. But like, I think the point of it is how to resolve it, how to collaborate across globally and resolve these issues. So I would rather for us to focus more on these things. But on the other hand, we understand that we can't change public opinions. It's always going to happen, but that's just a subset of those people, and we're not one of them.
Yeah, I think what was interesting and helpful for me when learning about this history, I think like both of you said, I guess more not so much about figuring out what disease actually from where, but more of like knowing that the issues of racism has been a lot more has been added out in a lot more covert way, and more, just like a lot more increases cases lately, even in my own personal experience of my surrounding. And it's interesting and even helpful for me to figure out, okay, this is actually a thread in the history. In the history, actually, we always know that racism always exists, and but it's interesting to know actually in times whenever these big disease happens, it's where you see a lot more cases of increasing. You see this almost adding out a lot more largely, and the minority, this case Asian Americans population, suffering a lot more in this process. I think I've been reading a couple of things to say that Asian Americans right now faces two crises, right? You got the coronavirus and you got this whatever racism, daily things that you face. So just like Melissa was saying, maybe for a lot of general public, it's really a lot to be anxious in dealing with groceries and whatever other things that coronavirus has come up. But then for us, for Asian Americans, it's also then the so many extra layers of what do you face if you go out and get groceries? What do I do? Do I stay here? Do I go back? So many other different racial related concerns.